A big part of putting together successful draft plans includes anticipating how the board will look as the draft unfolds. How will the cornerback position unfold for the Dolphins amidst their need there? We're exploring that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today on the show, we're going back to the secondary. We're looking at cornerbacks and specifically who might be there with that pick at the middle of the second round, fringe top 50 pick at number 48 overall. Because we've explored and stacked the board and did so for the 13th overall pick and kind of established I have 16 first-round grades, 3 guys who might be disqualified for medicals. So you've got 13 names. You're mathematically guaranteed to have a crack at one of them. And however you choose to shake that out of those players in those tiers, I think you can make good arguments for any of those players. But part of the decision to be made at 13, if the players are closely graded together, might have to do with, well, what does the rest of the board look like for us to get good talent later in the draft? So I want to take this to where a couple of my top ranked players are for the Dolphins at 13, which is Will Johnson and Jahdae Barron, a couple of cornerbacks, and look at cornerback at pick number 48 and who might be available. Could the Dolphins get a starter in that spot? And I know I can read the comments. They're in here. They're rolling like a movie already. I got it. PTSD, Cam Smith, Chris Greer, drafting second-round corners. Disaster, begging to happen. Can't happen. Don't let him pick a corner. I hear you. I understand. But every investment opportunity is its own unique opportunity. And I do think there are some players that I think can be big-time ball players at the cornerback position who might be on the board at pick number 48. Now, the question is, who makes it to pick number 48? And I know the general perception of this draft class is that you don't have loaded cornerback talent, but I do think there's a lot of scheme-specific types of players that are available to teams to pick. And let's operate in the assumption that Travis Hunter, Will Johnson, and Jahdae Barron are top 16 players. And let's assume for the exercise that we're looking at cornerback at 48 that the Dolphins don't take one of those 3 players. I do think that leaves you with probably predictively 7 other corners that are kind of in the conversation for between pick number 15 or 14 or 13, like wherever you want to start that line, and when the Dolphins next come on the board. And I want to read the names, and we're going to talk about a couple of them, and then talk about why I think a couple of them might not be there by pick number 48. Those names, as I have them graded for universal draft, not for Dolphin specific, but these are the 7 names that I have next to cornerback 4 through 10 for the 33rd team as I'm grading for all 32 teams simultaneously, where some of these guys are scheme-specific type of players. Shavon Revel, cornerback ECU. That's a name that made an appearance in a cameo in the top 16 list, but there's a medical flag there. So potentially a disqualifier from pick number 13. I would not pick him with the medical concern that he has, just like Josh Simmons was ranked top 5 on that list we looked at yesterday. I wouldn't pick him at 13 because of the medical flag. I could think of a comparable player last year was Peyton Wilson was a very highly graded player for me on my Dolphins board last year, the linebacker out of NC State, who had big-time medical flags as an older player and had a couple season-ending injuries. He ended up falling to the third round, but was one of the best rookie linebackers in football, right? It's not a talent issue, it's a risk issue. So Shavon Revel at pick number 16 or 13 as my 16th ranked player is not an appropriate risk that I would want to take. So I wouldn't pick him there, but you get the 48 and if he's still there, you can say, hey, this might be best player available. Is the risk worth it here? We'll talk about him in a minute. Trey Amos from Mississippi, Darian Porter from Iowa State, Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, Jacob Parrish, Kansas State, Benjamin Morrison, Notre Dame, and Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State. You get past that point, and I don't think you're realistically looking at top 50 candidates anymore. I think you're looking to see who would potentially be back up around the turn when you come up at number 98 again. So that's the question of that. I think that's the talent pool at cornerback you have to work with. Who makes it there? Who's less likely to make it there? I think Darian Porter and Maxwell Hairston are two of the players that are less likely to make it there when you consider Darian Porter from Iowa State, 6'3", 195, 80-inch wingspan, which is 95th percentile for cornerbacks. It's a monstrous player. And ran a 4.3 flat. Okay. And I think the athletic profile there, and he did his agilities too. He had an 89th percentile 3-cone and an 83rd percentile short shuttle for corners since 2000. So this is a player from not just a straight line speed and length perspective, but also from a agility standpoint. Checks a lot of boxes. And I think there's some pretty good momentum there for him to be a top 40 pick. So I'd be surprised if Darian Porter from Iowa State, because of how well he tested, he's still a player that's relatively new to playing corner. So there's a lot of upside that you can bet on there, but he's played it the last couple of seasons. Is at his best with his eyes on the quarterback playing zone coverage. I think that's a mix that yields not being an option for the Dolphins at 48. I think Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky is the other really strong tester. He ran 4.28 at 5'11 and 1/4, 183 pounds. Not the biggest player, and he's not overly long. He's got 31-inch arms. His wingspan's more than 3 inches shorter than Darian Porter's, right, to kind of quantify the player. But he has, I think, better feet and better transitions. A little bit more of a Denzel Ward, Ronald Darby type of player as compared to some of the athletic measures and profiles for Darian Porter that you might recognize at corner. Let me make sure we're flipped over to corner. Sauce Gardner's a name. Eric Stokes, Tariq Woolen kind of paint the picture of the body type and players who have tested similarly. So obviously you're invoking those kinds of names, and Tariq Woolen slid because he was from UTSA. But I know a lot of people that really like Tariq Woolen as a top 50 player. So this is never say never as far as eliminating these players from the consideration, but Maxwell Hairston was much better on tape in 2023 than he was in 2024. He had a shoulder injury, he kind of showed up as far as when he was trying to tackle this past year when he came back from the shoulder injury. There's some Jason Verrett in his game, if you're familiar with Jason Verrett from TCU, who was a first-round pick by the Chargers, could never stay healthy. That's the concern with Hairston. But I would guess out of the 7 names that we listed, Hairston and Darian Porter are the 2 that are least likely to be on the board at 48. So we're not going to really deep dive into them because I think they're a little too far in that in-between of probably wouldn't take them at 13. They wouldn't be in consideration for me at 13, but least likely to be there at 48. The wild card's Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame, who has really clean tape but has a hip injury. And for the sake of draft picks and and hip injuries and medical risk, we're not going to dive into him. Right? I don't have him graded as highly as Shavon Revel, but he is another player that has kind of that medical flag that might make him available for you. Would probably be a first-round pick if he played this past year. I think some team may be comfortable with the medical because he had his injury pretty early. I would guess he's gone. So that leaves you with 4 names. It's Trey Amos and Azareye'h Thomas and then Shavon, Revel, and Jacob Parrish. We're going to look at each one of those 4 guys relatively in depth. We'll give them their moment in the sun here as we're prepping options at corner for pick number 48 in the event that the Dolphins go a different direction with the pick at 13. The first 2 of those names, Amos and Thomas, coming your way next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Ever check your bank account and wonder out loud, where did all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment all at the tips of your fingertips, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO gives you full visibility and control over all of your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you can stop managing your money and start building your wealth. When you use Monarch Money, you might realize just how much you're spending on those food delivery services directly to your door, and make some changes so that you can budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can now use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Let's start with Trey Amos, who is a hyper-competitive player. I think that's the first thing that stands out about Trey Amos. So want to give you his athletic profile, courtesy of mockdraftable.com. 6'3", 195 pounds, 78-inch wingspan, ran a 4.43. So there's straight line speed here. There's, interestingly enough, for a 78th percentile 40-yard dash, he ran a 1.6 in the 10-yard. And I think that shows up on film for him sometimes. That's 21st percentile. So the initial tap-in burst is not quite as dynamic as what you see with the open field when he's able to open up his strides. But he's had a really interesting kind of journey where he played at Louisiana, and then after 3 seasons, he transferred to Alabama, and he didn't really get any traction at Bama, so then he transfers again to Ole Miss, and then he made this big leap this year playing with this very talented Ole Miss defense all around him. They were particularly talented in the front. A couple of the bullet points on the positives, and then we'll get into some of the negatives and how he might fit the Dolphins. Good length, implements it with good impact and press coverage at the catch point to extend and fight hands for the football. Natural ball skills have yielded good ball production as a confident defender in isolation on the perimeter, and shows a desired appetite as a run support defender to set hard edges in support. Those are the goods that exist with Trey Amos. As far as some of the areas of improvement, good but not great downfield speed to protect against vertical shots and isolated coverage. Inconsistent as a tackler in both head-up scenarios and as a pursuit rally defender away from the football, and can be overly aggressive with both his hands and his eyes as eager to make plays, but will benefit from added discipline. Projects as an outside player. I think the physicality projects well to press. And I know that's one of the things that's been suggested this offseason is the Dolphins may be looking at playing a little bit more press coverage. If you want to go that route, this is a player that has the physicality and he has the ball production and the ability, when he gets his eyes back and locates the football, he can convert really well into adjusting his tempo and his angles and his trajectory to hunt down the football. And I do think that's a big dividing variable between him and the next guy that we're going to talk about, who is another big, long, physical corner who can play and press. I think the concern I would have with Amos is some of that aggressiveness and eagerness to drive and trigger on stuff in front of his face. If you're going to play him in deep thirds and you're going to play him in cover 3, that eagerness to jump and attack stuff can leave you vulnerable, especially if you don't have the transition ability to immediately get back up to your top speed. And you see him at times, he gets a little bit stacked down the field and then has to rely on the throw pulling the receiver back to him. So that's Trey Amos. I like Trey Amos. I have him as a top 50 player for me when it's all said and done. Yeah, I mean, he's graded in the same bucket as Darian Porter. I think Amos doesn't quite check all the boxes to go super early in the way that I anticipate that Darian Porter will. The comp that I had down for him was Trayvon Diggs from Dallas. There's some boomer bust, but there's big time ball production potential here and a good athlete and a guy with some physicality. So he's an easy player for me to like. The next name that we have is the quintessential press player. And he's not going to be for everybody, but if you wanted to become a press man, cover one, man defense type of scheme, this is your dude right here. Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State. 6'1.5", 197, 32, effectively 32 and a half inch arms. So he's 80th percentile for arm length. The only test he did athletically at the NFL Combine was the broad jump, and he was 53rd percentile. So he's not the athlete that Trey Amos is, but he's longer than Trey Amos is, and he is definitely more physical than Trey Amos as well. He will beat you up at the line of scrimmage. That's the best thing about him. And because he's so long and because he's so strong, what he's able to do is he is able to really disrupt your timing, your ability to get out. Think of L'Jarius Sneed pressing Tyreek Hill. Like, I'm not going to call him L'Jarius Sneed. Do I think he could be a L'Jarius Sneed type of player if he hits a ceiling? Yeah, I do. But the challenge there is I think he's a very scheme-specific type of player, and that I think hurts him a little bit in my grade for the Dolphins, because what I have down for strengths for Azareye'h Thomas, elite length and disruptive ability as a coverage player at the catch point and at the line of scrimmage. Plays with a physical presence as both a press corner and in support of the run. Impressive fluidity for a player of his stature to make transitions in space. But the actual foot speed is limited due to his high cut frame. He's lacked consistent ability to locate the football when targeted, limiting his ball production, and appears to only have sufficient vertical speed, making technique in the contact window paramount for his success. He is the younger brother of Dallas Cowboys safety Azareye'h Thomas, who played at Georgia Tech. He was a 4-star recruit and was an offensive and defensive weapon at his time in high school. Had a bunch of offers from schools like Georgia Tech, Florida, LSU, Oklahoma, Florida State, and had declared for the draft as a junior this year. So younger player than Trey Amos. I don't think he's as dynamic as Trey Amos. He doesn't have as good of ball skills as Trey Amos, but he's bigger, longer, more physical. I think he's more dominant in press coverage. So that's the question for Miami, and it kind of goes back to the same thing, not exactly, but the question that kind of existed when we were weighing last week, Will Johnson versus Jahdae Barron, is what's more important to you? Do you want a player that blurs the lines with all the coverage responsibilities and all the spots? Or do you want a player that you can potentially utilize in press that would eliminate an area of the field and potentially ineligible, and then play 10-on-10 elsewhere on defense? And I don't know what's more important to them. I'm not in the pre-draft meetings and rooms, but that would be the argument for Azareye'h Thomas in my mind is you want that player that can physically dictate, is physically dominant. If you're going to trust your safeties to kind of help on the back end, you're more dynamic there for sure than what you were when it was Jordan Poyer back there trying to play half field coverage and get in position to make plays on the football, right? So that's the selling point on those two players, who I think profile similarly for their strengths and the role that they would play. Now, I think you've got the highest ceiling player. And I've got a first round grade on Shavon Revel. We're going to talk about him, and we're going to talk about, I think, one of the most underappreciated players because of his stature. But the film don't lie with Jacob Parrish. We're going to talk about those two next as potential cornerback options for the Dolphins at pick number 48 if they went a different direction at 13. That's coming your way next. Stick with us. March Madness is here. FanDuel's giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. And with only a few games left in the tournament, now is the time to get in on all the actions. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who is going to cut down the nets. If you have your eye on a particular one seed that you want to back the rest of the way, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with spreads, totals, and game props. And the FanDuel app is simple and easy to use. So when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around for your funds. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on all of the remaining college hoops action for the rest of the tournament. Let's talk a little bit about Shavon Revel. And I know we've already given some broad brush strokes to Shavon because he's a name that popped up when we did the list for first round grades that I had. But this player, love his background, love his story. He's a fifth-year senior player, so he's not one of these super young guys that's coming out. Had an ACL tear in practice in September. But just the journey that he's taken to get to this point. I want to read this off the background, and I really hate coming on the show and just reading text. But this is off of my biography background that I put together for his report for the 33rd team. Revel hails from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, played his high school football for a pair of programs in the state of North Carolina. The two-way player, Revel played his first 3 seasons of high school for Reynolds before transferring to Reagan for his final prep season, where he also lettered in track and field. He was a 3-star recruit, but ultimately enrolled in JUCO program Lewisburg College for his freshman and true sophomore seasons. While playing at Lewisburg, Revel famously worked shifts overnight at an Amazon warehouse to make ends meet before driving spontaneously to partake in a prospect camp at ECU. On the spot, ran a 4.4 flat and had an 11-foot standing broad jump, and within a week was offered at ECU. And that was with the condition to get his grades up. He gets his grades up. He goes to ECU, has a couple years. Looked like this was going to be the big breakout year for him. The traits, prototypical stature and length to play press coverage and disrupt at the catch point. That's a theme amongst all the guys that we're spotlighting here for pick number 48, with the exception of the next one. Elite recovery and straight line speed. Demonstrates ideal closing burst in second gear in the open field. I think that's a differentiator that he has from both of Thomas and Amos. Now, he's not as dense as what like Azareye'h Thomas was 197 at the combine. Now, I'm not quite sure what Revel's playing weight would be. He was 194, but he's legit 6'2". And he's got a 79.34 or 79.75 wingspan and over 32.5-inch arms. So like the length is here. He's a few pounds lighter than Thomas. He was 188, I think, at the Shrine, and then bulked up to 194. So I don't really know what the playing weight is. Whopping tackler who provides jarring hits and consistent finishes. That's the one thing you see him as a pursuit player, both stepping up to the line of scrimmage and like on the far side of the field, running stuff down the field. Plays with a hot motor as well. The level of competition, did not see very many high-level wide receivers, can be guilty of being overly physical and grabby. He was flagged 11 times in under 900 snaps in coverage at ECU. So that's the developmental leap plus the medical flag is the concern. Now, if he was there at 48, he'd be my preferred option. And I think the risk is worth the reward at that point, which I can't necessarily say at pick number 13, but the top 20 players on the board for you at 48 because of a medical. And if you feel good about the medical, and if you don't feel good about the medical, then just take him off the board altogether. Like, I get it. If he's not going to pass the medical and you don't feel like he's going to be a 2-year contract player for you, and you have concerns there, then just eliminate them altogether. And I can't speak intelligently on that because I haven't seen the medicals, right? This is the one that, like, this could be Richard Sherman-esque. Like, he's got that kind of physical, and they did play Michigan. Like, there's tape that exists for him on Michigan. You see some of the tackle, like, he's a nasty tackler. Comfortably the best player on the field when you watch them play. And there's a leap of faith that you have to take here. And that's why we're talking about this as a potential second-round fit, despite how good I think he projects into what the Dolphins could use in the secondary. The last name we're going to talk about is Jacob Parrish. And Jacob Parrish, you're going to get onto all of the NFL mock draft simulators, and he's going to be available at pick 98 and potentially sometimes available at pick number 115 or 116 for the Dolphins. And I just don't see that. I see like a Byron Murphy type of player. 5'9" 3/4, 191. Not a big player. No, that's 8th percentile for height and 27th percentile for weight for corner since 2000 at the NFL Combine. Okay, not a big player. Here's the silver lining. The wingspan is 52nd percentile. So it's average wingspan despite being 8th percentile height. And this cat might have the best press coverage reps out of anybody short of Azareye'h Thomas. Like, he's not big, but he has really good press coverage technique, and he's got really quick feet, and he's explosive. He ran a 4.35. So in high school, he was a 3-sport athlete. In football, he played running back, wide receiver, and DB. And then he played basketball, and then he was track and field. He did the 100-meter, and he ran the 100-meter in 10.47, which is fast and evidenced fast by the fact that he ran a digital 4.35 at the NFL Combine. So the jumps are explosive. He's 72nd and 88th percentile in his jumps at the Combine. That shows up on tape. He ran a 1.51, so his 10-yard split is 1/10 of a second faster than Trey Amos's is. And he's a smaller guy, so you'd expect that, right? And in some ways, the frame at just under 5'10" kind of helps him transitionally in space. I think he's got quicker feet than all these other guys because all these other guys are 6'1" plus. Like, your center of gravity is lower naturally. And because you have sufficient level wingspan and you're lower, you're built more compact, it doesn't kill you. It just means you have less margin for error on how to execute inside the press window. And I think he does that. Want to read a little bit more into the report here, just because this one's a little bit more off the beaten path of consensus for the player evaluation. Parrish is a scheme diverse talent with a strong profile to play in either man or zone heavy schemes at the NFL. His exposures to high difficulty and isolated assignments bode well for transition to the pros. Parrish played more reps in cover one man than any other coverage in 2024. His frequent play and press has honed and developed a skill set that should transition and allow him to disrupt the timing of opposing offenses and receivers in their releases. Parrish, as a man coverage defender, is physical with his press technique and capable of smothering route releases versus stale athletes at the line of scrimmage. Thanks to his compact frame, he boasts a lot of punch power to offset initial burst off the line. He also plays well from a side saddle technique when asked to invert to a deep half or play a deep third coverage while stemming his coverage from a pre-snap press. Look, I really love this player. This would be the one that I think could give you more of the Jahdae Barron type of skill set. Like, some people are going to just look at his size at 5'9" 3/4 and they're going to typecast him into being a slot. I don't think he's a slot, but if you want to play him in the slot as a run defender, he loves contact. Physical run insert player when playing the run strength or fitting as motion away puts him as a D-gap defender. Parrish is unafraid of contact and even triggered in the hole to make competitive tackle challenges on Cam Scatterbo in short yardage situations for minimal gains. Combative, offers enough length to punch and jolt receivers who are attempting to seal him on the perimeter as blocks. Swift enough to step up and square along the perimeter and beat blocks with angles in space. If this dude was the height of these other guys, you'd be talking about him as a no-brainer top 40, top 50 type player. I'm not going to be deterred by an inch in height, especially when the wingspan helps make up for it. Now, the place where that would show up is if he's playing in phase with a receiver, if he's playing on the hip, running with guys down the field in man-to-man coverage, depending on the trajectory of the ball as it's coming down from out of the quarterback's hands, if he's targeting tight coverage while playing in the hip pocket, because he doesn't have elite length and because he's not the tallest player, his ability from the back or the inside hip pocket to extend and disrupt the football as it's coming down, that's a smaller margin for him where, like, the leap ability has to really be there, but there's going to be some perfectly placed throws where he's just probably not going to be able to combat in the way that these other three guys would. Although, to be fair, Thomas and Revel aren't particularly known for their ball skills. And Thomas really doesn't get his eyes back to locate the football ever. He's face guard. So there's give and take. But these 4 options, I think you've got a decent chance to see 2 or 3 of these guys that make it to you at pick number 48 if you don't go corner at 13. So it's more options for you to consider. We're going to continue to do this at some of the other positions at pick number 48 before we stack the board at pick number 48. So you have that to look forward to here in the coming week or so here on Locked On Dolphins. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make a great rest of your day. We're out of here. Go Fins.